This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. One of my all-time favorite scenes in any movie is from The Big Lebowski. I have to admit, I'm a massive fan of the movie. I didn't get it the first two times I watched it. I had people that had, because I love the Coen brothers, and I had people that encouraged me, you got to go back and watch it. And every single time I watched it, it was like I was peeling back a layer of, I don't know, a big reveal, if you will. But contained within that film is the scene toward the end of the movie where the dude and Walter have gone out to this beautiful stretch of beach, obviously in California. It's a rugged coastline. They're on rocks, and they have their friend's ashes, which, by the way, are contained in a plastic Folgers coffee box. And Walter, played by John Goodman, stands there and does this long recitation about their friend Donnie and his life, and he decides to scatter Donnie's ashes at this moment in time. They've gone out there to memorialize Donnie. And as Walter does this, the breeze kicks up. And all of a sudden, these cremains are deposited on the dude. And his face is white with this ash. His clothing is white. His favorite bowling shirt, which is a shirt that he wears throughout much of the film. And it's something that many people don't think about. If I have cremains or ashes, what am I going to do with them? What shall I do with the remains of a loved one or a friend in their final repose? Well, Walter made a bad decision. But today, I'm going to talk about something that is far more horrendous that has occurred recently in Nevada. As a matter of fact, there is no memorialization. There's essentially a dumping of hundreds of human cremains. And right now, we ain't got no answers. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. How could those characters have not, or at least both of them, it's not just Walter's fault, how could they not have anticipated an inshore breeze?
Wow.
Because I've been to the beach. I know you've been there a lot over the course of your life in Cali, and it is beautiful. Well, it is beautiful. And the fact that those ashes blow back on them is no surprise. I think that's one of the reasons most of the time, well, I don't know if it's the only reason, when you deposit cremains in the ocean, they ask, and I've been looking at state laws, there's one place that says you need to go offshore 3 nautical miles in order to scatter ashes.
Right.
It's a curious thing, isn't it?
Well, otherwise you got people on the beach laying out, and all of a sudden they're reaching over, and kid comes up with a really neat shell, and you're going, "No, that's a tooth, baby." And just to share something with you guys, look, when I found out that we were lied to about cremains, because I thought cremains were like in a movie where they're like a powder, very powdery looking and kind of a dust and just kind of waft into the air. That's what it looks like. It was when my mother passed, and we had her, she was cremated, and we had her service out on Ocracoke Island, North Carolina, where she was raised. And it's my favorite place. It's my secret spot, right? But
not anymore.
Well, buddy, the thing is that, we go out there to do this, and, it's like they don't tell you. There should be a warning. And I'm going to give you guys that warning. Cremains are not dust, okay?
Yeah.
They can have teeth and a lot of big parts in it, but bottom line is always the bottom line, Joe. And in this particular story, we have a headline that at first you and I both thought it was like 30, which is bad enough. But I double checked. 300 piles of cremated human remains discovered near Las Vegas. Now, near Vegas, about an hour outside of town. But Joe, they went to all the effort to cremate a person, and then rather than give it to a family member or do something, They just took them out in the desert, and then it's almost like you mentioned the beach, because they're like building sandcastles like kids do on the beach. It's like they get a bucket and these are piles of cremains, and they're like,
they look like, I got to tell you, Dave, I urge anybody, any of our friends out there that are not familiar with the story, I urge you, because there's some images. And Dave, I got to tell you, brother, when I saw these, not to make light, but when I saw it, it looked like it, and they're almost in rows, and it looked like fire ant beds.
It did.
It did. They're kind of built up, they're mounded up, and nothing, I don't know. My son Noah is fascinated by the desert. He loves the desert. He loves going to the desert in Nevada. He was in the Air Force. He actually went, he was in Arizona. He and I actually, as a result of military service, were in the same location in Arizona, in Yuma. And he's fascinated by it, because it's so, for us growing up in the South, it's a completely foreign world. But I go back to another movie, Dave, real quick, Casino.
Oh, yeah.
With Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, and that infamous scene where Joe Pesci has summoned Robert De Niro to meet him in the desert, and you can hear the voiceover that De Niro says. He says, "I hate meetings in the desert," and it's something like nothing good ever happens in the desert. And dude, I got to tell you, the person, here we go again with the person we always talk about, the finder. Can you imagine this individual? Because it was a finder that is like out in the desert, and he's seeing these mounds out there, and you're thinking, what in the world is this?
Yeah. And the thing is, Joe, is that because you even said they look like ant, they don't look like anything one would expect, like from cremains. But here's the part that gets me. And there's so much about this that's wrong. Okay. But Joe, you explained to me how difficult it is to render a body down, because we've had a number of cases where somebody decided, they would dispose of the person they murdered by chopping them up and putting them on a fire or what have you. And I didn't know, I really didn't, until we started talking about how difficult it is and what is required to render a body to that status of cremains. So, Joe, first, let's start there. The fact that they're out there and there's 300 of them means a lot of things. These could be unclaimed bodies that somebody had to get rid of. I don't know what they do with paupers anymore. We used to have a place where
Potter's Field.
Yeah. What I call it, paupers. I meant Potter's Field, but anyway.
No. You're right. Some people do say paupers.
Pauper, yeah, like a pauper.
I think traditionally it's potters.
Okay, well,
and there's been I don't know. Sounds like a great title for a podcast.
Actually, sounds like something out of a movie that Jimmy Stewart would have been in, where he was the good guy.
Or a Charles Dickens novel, or some of the Potter's Field, or maybe even Stephen King. I don't know, but Potter's Field traditionally, and it's really sad, because working at coroner's offices and ME's offices, I have been to Potter's Field. I've literally seen bodies laid out in rows, where you collect the bodies over a period of time, and you wait until you can have a big burial. And a lot of people don't realize that was done. I doubt it's done as much anymore. But here's one thing that they have stopped doing in the medical legal world. And somebody might prove me wrong on this, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't think coroners and medical examiners cremate bodies anymore.
Oh, wow.
Because the fact that there's always a chance that a family will show up. All we got to do, we've talked about it before, all we got to do is talk about Michael Jordan's daddy. And what a train wreck that was for that poor coroner up there in Marlboro County, South Carolina. And you look at that and you think, yikes, So many times I think the fallback position when you're talking about, and it's generally called indigent burial, is the way it's referred to as. And there will be, I've tried to describe what this is like to many people, but if you've ever, the worst job I ever had in my life was working at Piggly Wiggly. I hated that job. I was a kid and I was the stock guy. I had to get in early in the morning, unload trucks. But on the back of 18 wheelers, they've got that that numbered aluminum tag that actually has to be cut open, and it's there for the protection of the goods inside of the vehicle, and they're very resilient. Well, with traditionally with indigent remains, you take this band, and it's an identifying band, and you put one around the ankle and you put one around the wrist of the body that's going to go into a body bag. It might go into like a really cheap casket, but sometimes they'll just they used to put them directly into the ground in a bag like that. But you knew that the bodies would be organized so that if any question came up, like with the band, you'd be able to say, okay, this is case number 000859. All right. And we can go back, you can pull back the earth, find that, I don't know, that vessel that the body is contained in, pull it out and go back and do further examination. You do that with cremains. What are you going to tag with cremains? It's like trying to tag chunky talcum powder.
Wow.
There's nothing, that you can really do with it. And this has got to pose a huge problem, for whoever is actually looking into this case, which again is a very, very curious thing.
Well, the one thing they did determine is that they're human. Okay, that was the first thing they had to decide, because they haven't mentioned much about the finder. And you've got me so focused on the finder now, because it's like, okay, well, why? Okay, why were you 59 minutes outside of Las Vegas in the desert where you stumbled upon 300 piles of dirt, you thought, and yet you knew it was something other than that, so you called it in? What were you doing out there that we can legitimately buy into? Because I'm thinking you were looking for a spot. You don't just fall into this area. But Joe, to go to all the effort to create cremains, to render a body down, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes intentionality. It's not something that accidentally happens by ignoring a dead body. It doesn't just, if you don't have them stacked up and you just kind of lock the door and walk away, and then you come back a couple of weeks later and there's a nice little pile of dust. This is something based on the way they were found.
Yep.
This was actually rendered down, put in a bag, and nobody picked it up, or they had no place to send it. And so the best plan, again, now I'm thinking, you spent the time and effort to render the body down into this form, and you couldn't come up with anything better than this. You could not put it in a big Ziploc freezer bag and dig a hole and put it in there and mark it somehow. I mean, you couldn't even think to do that. You just left cremains sitting out to be caught in the breeze in the desert to blend in. If that was your goal, why didn't you just spread them and kick it over? If nobody knows and nobody cares, I really have to wonder, Joe, there are so many other things you could have done that would have, look, man, if I came looking for Uncle Herman 3 years after he died and you're the one that got rid of him, I don't know what happened to him. Nobody claimed him. I don't know what happened. That's the only answer. You didn't come and pick your uncle up, Dave. It's not my fault, but here we got piles out there.
Hey, let me throw one more thing. Yeah. We're talking about the desert. You know what else is near Vegas? That's, I guess, an hour away is Lake Mead.
Yeah.
You've got Hoover Dam. You got the Colorado River, dude. If I looked at this and I was thinking, why would you go to this particular spot and do this and leave? And this is literally evidence. And when you talk about these piles, Dave, this is something, and I know what you had mentioned about, the passing of your mama. And when you got to examine those remains, and when you see that, but let's face it, what's intriguing about this to me from a physical evidence standpoint is the fact that you've got something going on here that I'm going to refer to as containment, because you do not get neat piles like this unless you have this thing in a transportable vessel where you're going to go with these and set them out. There's another factor here too. Now, I mentioned wind. Desert ain't got a lot of water, as we well know. What it does have is wind. Mm-hmm. How is it how is it that these piles have seemingly remained rather uniformed? I don't know. I think one of the elements here that I'm really concerned about and really interested in is time. Time as it applies to, were these things all deposited at the same time? I was trying to think back. I know that our friends out in the Vegas area, which, by the way, makes me think we're going to be traveling to Vegas in a few months. CrimeCon is a meeting there, 2026. Is it already time again?
Man.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll be heading back out that way. Maybe you and I can rent us a car and go out there.
And go out to the desert?
Yeah,
I ain't going out to the desert with,
De Niro says not to, or at least his character. So, yeah. But anyway, yeah,
So you ditched me a few minutes ago. I set up the whole thing because we were doing an episode. I don't remember which one it was, but it was one of the episodes where somebody tried to burn up a body and they were not successful at it. And so actually, you know what it was? It was our least favorite, JJ and Tylee.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first time when you actually explained the process because they tried to burn Tylee. And Joe, knowing what it goes into it and knowing that to get cremains like this, they didn't do this in a backyard burn pile.
No.
So talk to me about what goes into it, because this is a whole thing. It's not something you could do with your granny 315 times over. Just saying, it didn't happen like that.
No. Here's the thing with cremation. First off, there is a huge chunk of time that is involved in this. It's not something. See, how can I? It's not like you've got though there is kind of a conveyor belt process. It's not like you're just kind of pushing something into an oven and it quickly comes out the other end. That's not the way this works. All right. First off, you have to have a crematory that is up to the task. If we reflect back in time, and we did an episode on the tri-state crematory debacle. I urge anybody here within the sound of my voice to go look that up. Not just my episode, but just look it up, because it's one of the most ghastly things that's ever happened in the South. I think, as far as the dead are concerned, that crematory, that guy had tried to actually hook up propane tanks to his crematory to make it operate.
That was so despicable.
It's disgusting. It's absolutely one of the most disgusting things. And of course, propane does not burn as hot, as like natural gas. And you have to have an ongoing gas supply for a crematory. We're not talking about building fires here. We're not talking about a funeral pyre. So I bet you just thought of a Door song when I said that, didn't you? So I know you, man. So we're not talking about building a wooden structure to consume a body. We're talking about a containment system, and it is truly a containment system in the fact that you have to meet certain EPA regulations, and you have to be literally trained and certified in order to do this. There's all kinds of checks and balances. Like, you can get a visit from the EPA or the state version of that, and you have to be up to date. So it's not something that just like somebody can just go out and do. So in order to make this happen, a lot of it has to do with the mass of the body. All right. And it makes sense, right? So the smaller the body, the smaller the remains, the shorter amount of time it's going to take to consume it.
What if you're really fat? I mean this in the nicest way possible. I mean, really a fat person, with a lot of just water weight and flub. I mean, that burns off. I would think,
but there are actually stories out there. I don't know how many of them are true and how many are kind of anecdotal, but they have had the equivalent of grease fires in crematories where it flames over, which is, it just seems to me that would be an absolute nightmare, where you have, bodies.
Some crematorium guy in there doing it, and it's his mother-in-law that he's having to take care of, and he says, "See, I told you where she was going. You see,
it's bad. It really is. There's so much, and and to give you an idea, I've participated in autopsies of people that were, let's just say, way, way up in the triple digits in weight. That's about as far as I'll go with it, and those are the toughest cases in the autopsy room to open, because the size of the body, when you actually make that incision, you see the full thickness of the fat layer. And I'm not talking about like sub-Q fat. I'm talking about the full thickness of particularly belly fat. I've seen probably the thickness up to 8 to 9 inches in depth of fat. And it is problematic, but all of that has to be contained within this structure, within the crematory itself. And it has to burn. We're talking, I mentioned 3 digits with weight. We're talking about 4 digits now with temperature. We're talking sustained 1,400 degrees, if you can begin to kind of wrap your brain around that.
Wow.
And inside of the structure itself, inside of the crematory, there are these little gas jets that line this thing. And so they're blasting out a flame, and it's a directed flame at the subject that's contained within it. And this has to keep going. It has to be monitored. And over a period of time, they will inspect it to see if the rendering has taken place. Because just because the body might be rendered, it might be rendered down, the task is not over with. Because as the body comes out, what is initially taken off of the belt itself goes into an auger, and the auger spins. It looks like a gigantic screw. They used to use I've seen opposing stones, these round stones that roll in opposite directions, and it's kind of like if you think about like a stone crusher, but it's primarily augers, and they go around and round and round. It kind of looks like a screw or a drill bit, only it's tapered, and the cremains are essentially crushed in here down to finer elements. You're still not going to get rid of any kind of all of the skeletal sample. It's not going to happen. And teeth are the worst. So, and the other thing that they will do, they'll go through, and if they're like any kind of medical devices, something that has not been completely rendered down, those things will actually be removed and taken out. Things like titanium screws and all that kind of stuff. If people have had surgeries, wires. I think I've seen pacemakers before, if I'm not mistaken. I might be, but the leads for the pacemaker will be burned off. So yeah, and then after that happens, the cremains, as they are then taken, they're bagged, and then whatever kind of, I keep using this term, conveyance, I guess, that the family chooses, whether it's some kind of really ornate box or if it's a very simple little thing, they'll be placed in there, and, they'll be made available to the family after a period of time. They can come and retrieve these, and you get plaques put on them, all these sorts of things. What's really fascinating about this, Dave, and if you don't mind, just indulge me for a second, and I will kind of tell you this. In America, the U.S., there are approximately 10,500 crematories nationwide in the U.S. Okay. In Nevada, there are, as you can imagine, fewer than that. There's 56. What have I told you in the past, Dave? Maybe I've told this to my students. I haven't mentioned this to you. When we do an investigation in forensics, I like to use the idea of a big funnel where we've got all of this data that we kind of dump into the opening of the funnel. And if you think about how a funnel works, it narrows as it gets down further and further. So if these bodies, and this is a big if, but if these bodies are originating in Nevada, well, there are only 56 licensed crematories. So our field automatically is narrowed down because I don't know of any other organization that is permitted under law to cremate bodies unless we've got something really, really weird and bizarre going on here, where, I don't know, somebody has their own crematory that's operating illegally and they're taking bodies. That's been one of my it's not really a fear that I have, but I've thought about it from an investigative standpoint. What would be the perfect thing if you wanted to get rid of bodies, right? If you had, first off, you had a funeral home, you had access to doing, we've heard, and maybe this is kind of a fictional device, but where you can put a false bottom in a casket and then bury a person on top of, put them in the casket. Grandma goes on top of somebody that they're trying to get rid of and they bury it. Sounds like
that's not real.
I don't know if it is. Again, anecdotally, it's claimed that has occurred before, particularly when you think about, I guess the term used to be mobbed up. If there was some funeral, home that had some kind of loose attachment to some underworld figures or something.
I can tell you never watched the Netflix series Ozark, did you?
No, I did. I watched part of it. Yeah.
Okay, you didn't get to the part where they owned the funeral home.
Yeah, it's coming back to me. Maybe that's where I'm remembering this from.
Okay.
It seems like the perfect thing, and but you'd have to have access. Okay, let me throw this one out to you. Again, reflecting back to one of our previous episodes, one of my favorite episodes. It's the case out of, I don't know if you recall this. It was the case out of Philly where they had the abandoned graveyard or cemetery that was shut down because it was too full. And the biker gang was going into the crypt in there and putting remains down the ground. Again, great episode, fascinating case. So yeah, again, having access to that location. I'm not saying that the malevolent people involved in that case had anything to do with a funeral home, but I think that investigatively we're going to get more answers here. Just thinking about kind of how this is kind of, no pun intended, parsed out investigatively, how you do it. Because here's the thing, technically, these cremains don't necessarily fall, and I found this very fascinating, Dave. They don't fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner or coroner. This is a state health department issue at this point in time. They found something out there, Dave, that gave them an indication, first off, that they were cremains, and secondly, that they were human cremains. So that means that they had to take sample. Because trust me, if you think it's tough to get an ID on an intact body, even one that is severely decomposed, You ain't tried nothing until you've tried to get an ID on cremated human remains. What to do in Nevada. A lot of people spend their time in Nevada, going down on the strip, and used to get a really good meal in Las Vegas for cheap. Them days are gone, Bubba. I used to think, man, I can't wait to get out to Nevada and grab some lobster while I'm out
it's so
there.
funny how the older you get, things really change. When you're younger, the idea of going to Vegas is one thing. Then you hit a certain age where it's like, the buffet. Oh. Come on. Hey, I want to ask a couple quick things here. All right. At the end of World War II, Patton actually forced townspeople from Weimar to actually tour Buchenwald, the concentration camp.
Yes.
And the reason is because they were exterminating an entire race and then some by putting them through the fire. They were burning these bodies down and creating cremains, and the stacks would blow. And on certain days, the gardens would be covered with this white powdery ash. And he was disgusted by how the townspeople acted like they didn't know anything. And he's like, there's no way you can see thousands of people coming in here and not leaving, and the camp not overgrowing with people. And, you got to put two and two together. So he marched them through. He made them come through there and walk through the ovens. And there were partially burnt bodies that were not totally broken down. Anyway, that's what's going through my head is we have 300 plus piles of people. Each one of these piles of cremains is a person. Now, if you were just going to dispose of somebody, Joe, this is not how you would do it. I mean, even though there are 300 bodies placed in, their cremain form out there in the desert, an hour away from Vegas, south of Vegas, by the way, and they seem to be, from what you and I saw, they were actually put there in some kind of an order. Whoever did it took care with what they were doing, but I can't get past, I'm having a little trouble with the why would you go to all that trouble if all you're going to do is put these people's cremains out there in the desert to be blown away, to just go to the, that makes, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I get it, but it doesn't seem like you're being the most respectful in this regard by allowing the wind to just blow. But we know they've identified the remains as human, which I didn't know you could. I really didn't. I mean, can you, and this is kind of the deal breaker here, could you, if you can identify them as human, could you get a DNA sample from partial tooth or something?
Yeah, good question, my friend. Well, obviously, I think that now look, this goes back to something quite interesting. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on Body Bags. Do you know that there are three types of identification, or let me see, 3 levels of identification, and we can kind of write this down. Maybe we can do an entire episode on how does a medical examiner get bodies identified, but just as kind of like a little tease right here. We have positive identification, okay, where we have verified scientifically and unfortunately visually many times, which I'm not a big fan of visual identification. First off, I don't trust government IDs as far as I can throw them. I preach this to my kids at Jack State all the time. It's a great place to start, but if you pull a license out of somebody's pocket and you try to compare it, there's some horrific stories out there about misidentification. That's really what we ought to do an episode on. It's quite chilling. But positive identification, and then we have unidentified bodies. Okay, some that to this point have failed to have been identified. They're not going to be identified. Well, unless our friends at Othram do it. And then here's the one that really gets people. There is an ID that is called presumptive identification. And it's something that people are not necessarily familiar with. Years ago, I had a lady that was locked up in a house. I actually wrote about this in Blood Beneath My Feet. The case really affected me. And she she had no living relatives. She worked as a bus driver in Atlanta, and we presumptively identified her body, and she had been, now hold on to your hat. This is really disgusting. She lived in the house with her dogs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And they consumed her down to her waist. There was nothing left. And the case really affected me as an investigator. It's one of those things that you don't ever get past. We even had difficulty just trying to find a dentist that she may have gone to. It turns out she didn't have a dentist. And so because she was in a locked house, her keys were there, her money was there, no signs of forced entry, and her car was still there, and she hadn't shown up for work in weeks. I'll give you a hint. There's no future investigators in the Postal Service because she had piles and piles of mail stacked up outside of her house. As a matter of fact, so many piles of mail that several of them had actually fallen off of the porch into the gutter adjacent, but they just kept stacking up the mail. She'd been in there for months and months. And it was problematic for us. And I hated doing that, but we presumptively identified her. And what that means is that we don't really have anything substantive to go with. We looked at her body, what remained of her body, and I could say, yes, this was an African-American female because we had soft tissue. We knew that an African-American female resided at this address. She was domiciled there. We knew that she was human. But what are you going to go with these cremains? Well, my thought is, I wonder if they have taken the time to go to each, and because each one of these piles presumptively represents an individual person. And here on Body Bags, we are advocates for the dead. Okay. So each person is entitled to their ID and to be honored. Okay. Have they gotten each pile, first off, presumptively ID'd? Do we know that that is, in fact, human? What was contained in each pile? Do we have major bits of bone that were contained in there that from a morphology standpoint, you can have a forensic anthropologist look at each little fragment and say, yes, definitively, this is a bone. Okay, this is human bone. And then, was there any dentition left in any of these piles? You'd mentioned maybe a partial tooth.
Right.
Were there intact teeth at all? And if they were intact, could those teeth have withstood the 1400 degree, or it's variable, it's not always going to be 4. Could those teeth have survived, or the DNA contained in there survived? Because that's the only place you're going to get DNA. I would think, I might be off base there, but I think that that's going to be your number one shot. Do you think that it's possible that they went in and did DNA extraction on teeth, any kind of dentition that was left behind, and they were able to actually profile that case and create a profile on the person? I don't know. I don't know if that's possible, because it's a real head scratcher. Another piece to this, Dave, that on its surface is, I guess, kind of heartwarming, but not really, is that the state medical examiner, or they don't have medical examiners in Nevada, forgive me, they have coroners. And by the way, Clark County coroner is one of the finest in the country. I mean, they're really good. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that on that program, CSI, the coroner is spoken about a lot. The one that takes place, I've never watched those programs, but the one that takes place in Vegas, they're highly regarded, and not because of the television show. It's because they're damn professional. They're really good. This was not the coroner's office going to collect these remains? This is actually, and they're mentioned in the article, they're actually, this mortuary service goes out and retrieves these remains.
Isn't that
so
crazy?
How does all of this work, I think, is the big question. Because, look, God bless people in the funeral industry, but got to tell you, I'm not looking to the funeral industry to do the job of forensic scientists, because to this point, they have not validated as to whether or not there's something nefarious going on with each one of these little piles out there. How do you run all of this down? I've got to imagine that in Nevada somewhere, because they haven't released a lot of info yet, and maybe they will. They haven't released a lot of info yet, but there's got to be people, Dave, I would think, that are scratching their heads out there saying, oh my Lord, this was, what do people say nowadays? This was not on my bingo card. Well, how do we move forward with this?
The thing about this that gets me is that if this was a crematorium trying to get away with saving money and giving families dirt instead, we wouldn't have cremains in a pile in the desert. If it was somebody, because what they've done here, they've done all the expensive, hard part of the job.
Right.
That part is what has already been done. So we're not looking at a criminal act in that regard, that they were trying to dodge going to, like, you mentioned the guy using the propane tanks to try to accomplish, doing a cremation that, ridiculous. But this was done. 300 plus bodies have been cremated completely, and here's their pile. So the hard, expensive part of that job is done. The next part is, here's your cremains, send me the check, or whatever takes place. And so immediately I'm thinking this is something even worse. I mean, all I can think of is I again, and we talked about it a little bit ago. I thought, if you have people who are indigent and can't afford a burial and we cremate them, you still have to have a family that comes and collects the cremains. And if they don't, there should be a process for showing them some respect in their final form. And that's not what's being done here. So I'm thinking, if there's one person in all of these, in the 314 cremains found so far, if they can find and identify one.
Yep.
Just
right.
one.
I got to tell you, I'm right now, as you and I speak, I'm sitting here and I am reading Nevada Code section out of their law. And just as a point of reference, and I'll say it very slowly so anybody can go back and look at this, under NRS 451.700, and this is key, Dave, funeral homes and crematories, this is for Nevada, funeral homes and crematories must establish a clear chain of custody. Upon arrival at the facility, the deceased must be assigned a unique identification number recorded on all corresponding paperwork and attached to the body throughout the cremation process. The number is typically, here we go, I mentioned a few minutes ago, on a metal tag or bracelet that withstands, you ready for this, high temperatures. That's actually required by law. And in a continuance, and I'm not going to hate people, I hate being read to, but I just think that it's important. A separate section, this is NAC 642.435, facility. Now get this, again, we're going back for evidentiary issues here and responsibility. Facilities must maintain detailed records, including the deceased full legal name, date of birth, date of death, and identifying physical characteristics. If discrepancies arise, cremation must be postponed until identity is conclusively verified. That's kind of plainly set out. And that's why I go back to that kind of narrow number, 56. Got 56. Now, let's see, the adjacent states there. I shouldn't have opened my mouth. But the adjacent states, who has access to, or what other states have the quickest access to Nevada? Could it be another state?
California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, they're all around.
There's that
Nevada.
confluence in that area.
I don't know.
But I can't imagine driving. I mean, Salt Lake City, forgive me. Las Vegas is down in the southern part of the state. That's a long way to drive if you're coming
and
from
this is 60 miles south of Vegas.
South. Oh, okay. Yeah. There you go. So I don't know. I mean, I got to tell you, out of all the cases we've covered, this is special in the sense that I think, unless there is a very simple explanation for this, and I can't imagine that the simple explanation is going to be legal, okay, or condoned under law. This is an ultimate nightmare scenario when it comes to death investigation. Because you have these unidentified remains that are just kind of piled up neatly for whatever that's worth. I don't know. What is this person, a fastidious ghoul? I have no idea. There's specific arrangement, order to this thing. I look at this, Dave, from a death investigator forensics, standpoint, and I'm thinking the order of this thing, were they trying to send a message? I'd love to see one of these people that do profiling, dig into this. Can you imagine a profiler takes this thing and looks at it and says, what can you tell us about about how these are arranged, and that they would, deposit these remains out in the desert, like this? I don't know. You got to promise me. You got to promise me that we're going to revisit this. We've got to, because this is a big mystery.
As soon as I find out anything, I'll tell you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Because I got to tell you, man, out of all the cremation stories we've covered, the burial stories, and my Lord, we have had some stories recently about funeral homes and how they are handling bodies. This, I'm not going to say it takes the cake, but dude, it's up there. It's up there, and it is absolutely horrific. My heart goes out to these families. Here's one more thing, and I'll kind of end on this note. There are families out there in either, in the Nevada area or any of the surrounding states that have family members where they have walked into some fancy office somewhere, appointed with nice furniture, soft music playing in the background. You see it festooned with flowers. They've got the casket room. They've got the little vases that you can put your loved ones in. Somebody out there has walked into one of these facilities, and they have arranged to have their loved one identified and cremated. And right now, there are people in Nevada, I can guarantee you, that are reading the story. They're watching on the news. They're going to hear body bags, and they're going to be worried. They're going to be wringing their hands over this. Is that my mother? Is that my father? Is that my child that was left abandoned in the Nevada desert? More to come on this case. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.